Welcome, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson, and I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. I'm joined here tonight by Molly Wizenberg and Susan Landrum. I'm really excited to be talking about a memoir that we all loved at Charis. It's called The Fixed Stars. Molly is the best-selling author of 3 memoirs, The Fixed Stars most recently, but also A Homemade Life and Delancey. She was also, for 15 years, the voice behind the James Beard award-winning blog Orangette. With author Matthew Amster Burton, she co-hosts the hit food and comedy podcast Spilled Milk, now celebrating 10 years of bad jokes. And once upon a time, she co-founded the Seattle restaurants Delancey and Essex. She lives in Seattle. And we're here with Susan Landrum. Susan is a native of Atlanta and first stepped into Charis as a senior in high school to be part of the Young Writers Group led by Linda Bryant. And that is one of the places where she and I spent time together. This transformative experience forever shaped her understanding of intersectional feminism and planted the seeds of love for community building and development. After 4 New York winters at Vassar College and a stint in gorgeous Seattle as well, Susan made her way home. Susan is currently the executive director for Vox ATL, Atlanta's home for uncensored teen publishing and self-expression. She is fueled by plenty of coffee, books, friendship, family, and the earnest love of a hound named Elvis. So I am thrilled we were already talking about various animal noises that might be happening. There may be some guinea pigs happening. There may be some dog toys squeaking, but we trust that all of you are loving folks who are going to just roll with that. So I'm going to get out of the way, but before I do, I want to encourage you to do 2 things. One is, if you do not already own the Fixed Stars, we know that you want to make sure that you get one ASAP. So click that teal button at the bottom center of your screen. We will send you a signed copy. And then press the Ask a Question button at the very bottom center of your screen if you would like to ask Molly a question. Susan will be pulling from that spot. So you can also introduce yourself in the chat, tell us where you're watching from, and how long you have been a fan of Molly's work. So thank you all both for being here. We're so excited and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you. Thanks, ER. That was great.
That was awesome. Yeah, I feel like I'm getting to talk to somebody that I've known for a very long time. So Molly, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to meet you and really just want to start out by asking, how are you? How's your family? How are y'all holding up right now?
We are, I feel like we are, well, I feel really lucky. We're all healthy, and Ash is a therapist, and this is for a therapist, this is a busy season. So anyway, I feel really lucky that our home life feels pretty normal, although we never leave our home life really anymore. And yeah, it's tricky trying to figure out what we're doing about school this fall. We entertained some thoughts about switching up June's school situation, and now we're sticking with it. And we're all getting really good at changing our minds and trying to roll with it. Yeah. And I know that you're in Maine, which is not where you usually are.
No, it's not. I'm living a wild life in Maine with family, and have taken advantage of kind of the only one of the few things that I can say has brought, a lot of freedom to this time, is that you can work from anywhere. And so I picked up and came up here to be with family while my sister and her partner welcomed my new nephew into the fold. We have a 6-week-old in the family named Wilder, and I've got 2 nieces that I've gotten to hang with. So it's been a really, really joyful, beautiful summer. And I am going to be headed back to Atlanta soon. So I'm excited to get back to my home city too. And of course, we could geek out about Seattle all day. So I don't want to spend too much time doing that, but I am curious, how is Seattle weather right now?
It's the fact that I'm glowing like a ghost in your screen here is because the sun is out and I'm facing a window. So it's making me look even more pale than usual. So if you were in need of some sun, you're probably getting it reflected off my face right now. Enjoy. No, Seattle is great. Seattle is great right now, at least in terms of weather.
Yeah.
It's certainly, I think, a challenging time to live in such an expensive city.
Mm-hmm.
But the weather's good for now. So here we are.
That's something to take joy in.
Mm-hmm.
And y'all are building a platform. And can you tell us a little bit about building projects and what's bringing you joy right now?
So yeah, I seem to have surrounded myself in life with a bunch of people who like to make things with their hands, which is pretty great for getting us all through this time. Ash is building a tree platform, kind of just beyond where I'm sitting. So they have kindly stopped using the power saw during our event tonight. And anyway, June has been doing lots of embroidery and all kinds of things, and could be much, much worse. So we're trying to feel, trying to make the most of this summer time outside, and when I'm not sitting here in Crowdcast.
Well, I'm feeling grateful for Crowdcast as a reason to bring us together to talk about your book. You have written a beautiful book, and I will, just share with everybody who's watching that the book has resonated with me in some very specific ways. I feel like our journeys and paths have been highly paralleled, but also in just some like really broad and important ways too. Ultimately, I think that the book is about a person claiming all parts of themselves and who they are. And it is about, I think, uncovering a certain level of empathy and kindness for oneself in a very complex world that tries to talk us out of that often. So I'm just forever grateful that this book is in my life and in my library. And I also just want to say that it has a very precise and crystalline language. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your just writing process. The language that you use is just really incredible in the way that it invites the reader in, but doesn't give away too much. And I'm curious to know, is that a technique that you've worked with over time, or is it something that emerged specifically in this book?
Oh my gosh, I love that question. Thank you. So, it's been, writing this book was getting to write this particular book in this particular way was such a pleasure. And also, it felt so natural to me to sort of do something different and not use food as a jumping off point anymore. And to sort of to let myself find other ways of entering into scenes and stories. And it's been interesting. It's been interesting going through that process. I think people have been surprised that there wasn't going to be any food in it, because that is what my work has been primarily. But also because I think that, especially food writing, any kind of writing, the market wants you to keep doing what you have done, right? And so I feel hugely grateful to my editor, this lovely person named Jameson Stoltz, who really believed in my ability to sort of push off from the edge of the pool and splash around in these ideas and bring to a different kind of storytelling the skills that I think I learned through food writing. It's interesting because so I think that in an effort to so I think that food writing for a very long time has been sort of considered sort of a less serious type of writing.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly there have been very serious and very highly regarded, legendary, like literary food writers, like MFK Fisher, for instance. But I think for me, especially coming up as a young writer, starting food writing in earnest when I was 26, I think I felt a lot of pressure to be cute and to be easily digestible, and to not ruffle any feathers with either the content or the style of my writing. And in a sense, the effort of food writing, I think, taught me a lot about precise writing, because food writing is you never experience a meal in general, right? It's always a specific thing. Like it's always like a hot dog that you ate with your nephew. It's always embedded in this context. And so it really tuned my ear and my eye to how to enter into stories vividly and grounded in the kind of specific detail that when you read it on the page feels universal. And so actually now that I get to be out in the world talking about things other than just food, I feel this huge debt to that background that I have and the way that it taught me, the way that that good food writing is good writing, and the way that it taught me to do my job.
Yeah, I wondered specifically about, I've read a lot of your food writing and wondered how perhaps that sort of sensual experience of writing prepared you to write about sex. I mean, this book it's sexy and it has some really intimate moments, and you approach that with such just like, I don't want to say abandon, but you go there, you go to places with that I don't think a lot of writers know how to. And so I'm wondering if they're just to further push that a little bit, if writing about food and the sensuality of food. And I mean, I went on a voyage to DeFaras as a result of Delancey. So, just knowing that like those things can coexist, but this is a very different book. So yeah.
Well, I think part of what is endlessly interesting, or one of the things that I love the most about writing, is that it requires me to read, and to read, I think, widely, and to read like a writer. And so as I was going through this experience of my sexuality shifting and really feeling out what I wanted my life to look like, what my family might look like, who I like, how I might reshape my life as I knew it, I spent a lot of time immersing myself in what my spouse Ash and I now just refer to with the catch-all phrase gay stuff. Like, sometimes we'll be like, I'm really in the mood to watch some gay stuff. There's just something very, very different about at least, and I think this was true for me when I knew myself to be straight too. There was something really different about consuming art or media that was written from a place of kind of building the world as you want to see it, rather than building the world or reflecting the world that already exists, right? We have tons of TV shows about straight people that reflect in many ways, I mean, this is an oversimplification, but they have helped construct and reinforce the world as we know it, this primarily straight world. Sorry, I'm sitting on one of those like exercise ball things and I'm like rolling around all over the place. But there was something really liberating to me, and not just because it was like really hot, but there was something really liberating to me in consuming the work of gay writers, the work of gay filmmakers, in the way that it allowed me to envision a different way of being and a different way of writing and a different way of being turned on, for instance. And so when I decided to write this book, I knew that the physical aspect of what I was experiencing needed to have a place in here, and I wanted to write it. And so, it felt really natural and also really fun to take skills that I learned from writing food in all of its specificity and to put them toward observing the body or the intimate details of another person's body. It was it was pure fun. Even though this was a very thematically, this was a really hard story for me to tell. That aspect of it was so fun, and I felt so free.
Yeah. So that part was fun. And I think that there's a lot, I would imagine that there's a lot in this book that was really hard to write. Is this the book that you set out to write? How did you know that you needed to write it?
Well, I've never been like a journal keeper. I've never been a very disciplined daily kind of writer. And when I do write, it's generally because I am motivated by, for me, writing is like a technology for thinking. And writing is a tool for trying to make sense of what is otherwise kind of this just chaotic world that I'm otherwise just responding to. Writing gives me the opportunity to start to synthesize that. And so I started writing down kind of notes of what was happening and what I was thinking about, or also what I was reading, about a year into kind of the living of this story. And it was about another year after that until I felt like I was ready to devote the attention and energy, and that I had the attention and energy to devote to trying to answer, or if not answer, explore some of the questions that had arisen for me through this huge shift in my life and myself. Yeah.
I think that I was left wondering that, as somebody who, again, identifies a lot with the story, is just like, I'm not ready yet. When did Molly know that she was ready? Like, at what point do you look up and you're like, okay, this is the moment where I can craft. It's about crafting, putting the pieces together for yourself in a way that doesn't feel like you're still in it.
Well, and I think too that, at least for me, that part of getting to a place of feeling able to write about it with fairness toward myself, with fairness toward other people, that part of what got me to that point was writing. But, I think the thing that we tend to forget, and I know I tend to forget this because as I said, I'm not much of a journal keeper. And when I write, it tends to be because I'm ready to communicate something to someone else. I have to remind myself all the time that I don't have to show it to anyone for a while, and that the writing can just be that tool for healing over a wound, or for understanding myself. And it doesn't have to be ready for anyone else yet. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to have moved from that raw place to a more digested place, because the writing itself will get me there. I just have to show up and do that part of it.
Do you mind sharing a little bit with us from the book?
Sure, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to read this section that's about a third of the way through. I refer to we in this, and the we I refer to is myself and Brandon, who at this point in the book, I was still married to. We were not yet separated or divorced. We went to see family for Christmas. And when we got home, rather than thrill as I usually did at being back in our own bed, I felt like I had disappeared on the way. Everything and everyone seemed far away from me. It had been 7 months since jury duty, and I had never lost count. I felt worse, not better. To hide from the shame, or was it to escape everything else? To give in to the fantasies? I tunneled under, sunk even further into my head. I told no one what I was thinking. A friend was having a big birthday at the end of January, and he invited a bunch of us to a rental cabin in the snow. Brandon took the weekend off, and to celebrate the occasion, we bought new winter gloves, hat, and snow pants. For June, I brought along a brand new copy of Candyland, my favorite board game as a child. I had grand visions of us playing it, visions that evaporated as soon as I set it up, when I remembered that it's an instant nap for anyone over age 10, and June was enraged that it had rules. Instead, we rented cross-country skis. The first afternoon, even June made it a few yards. Then a friend took her back to the cabin, and the two of us got to ski on our own for a while, on a path through the woods. I hadn't been on skis since I was a kid, and I'd forgotten how quiet it was, the smooth and efficient swish of polyethylene through groomed tracks. We'd needed this to move together through the cold winter air. Our noses ran, and we licked our lips and wiped them on our sleeves. In the cabin, the heat vent was too close to the bed. I couldn't sleep, so I watched my husband and our child, these people I called mine, sweat sticking their twin hair to their twin faces. I put on my headlamp and boots and shuffled to the outhouse. Orion glittered above the tree line. On the drive home, I rode in the back with June. Snow was falling through the bluish dusk. June asked me for a story about Olaf, a friendly giant I'd made up, who often got into scrapes requiring the help of his human friend, June. As I spoke, she nodded off, and I caught Brandon's eye in the rearview mirror. I told him about a thing I'd recently heard her say, that she'd pointed at her own belly and said there was a baby there. She wanted to call the baby Juice Box. We laughed, wheezing, not wanting to wake her. How could this kind of contentment coexist with the mess in my head? How could this love coexist with the desire for a whole other love? Shouldn't they cancel each other out? I had watched my husband and child sleep, choked with feeling. I wanted to press a woman against a wall with the length of my body, a woman who looks like a boy, and fuck her. Does one life preclude another? I wanted both, two lives in this body, running alongside each other in parallel like ski tracks.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
I made a laundry list of themes that I wanted to chat about with you. I know that you are a fellow list maker, so it's good to meet another one. And the first is this idea of the expansiveness of love. It felt to me, reading your story, and I know that this is true of my own journey, that I was surprised at like what felt like an endless capacity to love people, whether or not the boundaries of that love shifted, or the energy that I could put towards that love was limited. It feels to me like love is an infinite resource, and there are moments in the book where you're trying to convince people of that, and I wonder, and specifically Brandon, and I wonder how you where you are in that at this moment. Like, what do you think about the expansiveness of love and it just as a resource for all of us?
Well, so the part of the book that where I have that conversation is the part where Brandon and I were talking about opening up our marriage, right? And I was learning so much at that time. That this is something that I think is so interesting about conversations about non-monogamy in particular. And I am in a monogamous relationship now, and I think that's what is best for me. But I think that's something that's so interesting about when we start to talk about non-monogamy. I think we get to have conversations, maybe for the first time, about what are the limits of love and what are the actual rules and expectations that we have for ourselves in the way that we love people and that we have for the people who love us. And it was the first time that I had ever encountered the idea that that it could be possible, and this seems so obvious to me now, that it could be possible to love more than one person. I mean, of course, like we love our friends. I love my child. I love my spouse. I love my mother. Of course, we are familiar with the idea of being able to contain and show the world many different kinds of love. But I think there's something incredibly freeing, whether we choose to act on it or not, about the idea that we are capable of loving deeply and really feeling connection with many people at a time. And I mean this just in terms of like the way that we might look at caring for other people in the world, and not just in terms of romantic relationships. I think we put so much pressure on our primary relationships to be the love for us. And even for those of us who are in like more normative monogamous relationships, I think that it is so hugely healthy to remember that the love we feel for our friends, for our family, that all of these things feed us too, and they need our attention the same way as the primary relationship in our lives. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. I'm wondering about, you found yourself in this book alone in particular moments. And I'm wondering about the relationship between finding yourself in those alone spaces and how that maybe informed your understanding of also like love for self being a part of that constellation. That if we're not understanding who we are and what we need, that the love that we bring into a partnership or into our next relationship is somehow limited in a way, if that makes sense. The question there is, when you were on your own and you were soaking in some alone time. I know for me, I've spent more time by myself in this past year than I had in years. What surprised you about that? And maybe what are some of the things that you've maintained as a practice, even in your current monogamous relationship?
I think that particularly for me I think that I have always been someone who, I think there are many of us like this, but I've always been someone who feels a certain sense of safety in the world that is proportional to my ability to control the world. And so that has meant that in my relationships, particularly romantically, I have wound up trying to take care of everyone. And that was only reinforced by becoming a mother, which then gives you this real biological imperative with all kinds of hormones and stuff to drive it along, to care for everyone. And I think one of the greatest surprises to me about getting to be alone again in the way that I did after Brandon and I separated and we had established a custody schedule. We each have her half of the week. One of the biggest surprises to me was that I all of a sudden got this expanse of time that I don't think I had ever as an adult woman had, because in relationship, I always busied myself with care, with taking care. And I think that this started for me as a child, like, when you're on an airplane, remember we used to get on airplanes? Mm-hmm. When you're on an airplane and they say the thing about, put your child's, put your own mask on before your child's. I remember as a child hearing that and being like, but my mom is supposed to, she shouldn't put hers on first. She should put mine on first. And so I think it was very deep in me, and I don't think it's just me. I mean, I think it's growing up as a female presenting person in this world. I think I learned very early on that that as an adult woman, I was to care for everyone else. And I still struggle with that. But one of the hugest gifts to me of divorce has been developing a different relationship, a different caring relationship for myself, and not allowing myself to tell myself what would be the easy thing, which is that I'm getting this time because I'm not with my child, which is still painful. But I feel really grateful to have a partner who really reminds me all the time that I don't have to be doing anything for anyone or doing anything at all in order to have value. Because I think that I'm still unlearning that.
Yeah. There's you do self-identify as a people pleaser in the book, and that's something that I definitely identify with as well. And you have a very profound moment where you assert with these words, I'm the one I have to live with for the rest of my life. I have to do right by me. And when I read those words on the page, they just jumped at me, because that's such an incredibly important assertion to stay true to. So I'm grateful. It sounds to me like you found people to help you remain true to that assertion, and that's a beautiful thing. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I feel really grateful to get to have a really to get to have in adulthood, to get to redefine what it looks like to be, to get to redefine for myself what it looks like to be a good partner, a good mother, a good friend, and to have a spouse who encourages me to define that on my own terms.
Is that a relationship, like when I'm thinking about queerness and how this is in many ways a queer memoir or a queer coming of age, and in a very different coming of age kind of way, I do wonder about the relationship between those things, being able to redefine and reshape our lives with a different, well, with no rules in many ways, but how does your identity now as a queer woman relate to that sort of reshaping and reformation of your life? Is it something that you're actively in conversation with, or is it just something that's sort of fallen in the, it's more in the background, or is it an active conversation?
It's hard to say how much of it has to do with, I mean, I think some of it, like, I love the idea that this is a coming of age book, even though I'm 41, because it does feel that way. Oh my God, the guinea pigs are making a lot of noise over here. Oh geez, there's a lot of squeaking happening. It feels that way to me because in many ways, I think that I've spent my whole life assuming that everybody sort of like knew better than I did, or like everybody knew the way things worked before I did. And that and becoming or starting to try to, well, even like starting to date, I felt like I had this huge hurdle to overcome, that I felt so unappealing. You know, I felt like I am this like straight presenting mom type, the least queer person ever. And who could possibly, and my first relationship, as I wrote about in the book, I think reeinforced a lot of those feelings that I had that I was not queer enough. And in many ways, like that's the same voice that lives inside our heads in middle school, right? You know, when we're not popular enough, we're not XYZ enough. And I feel like part of the work of growing up has been not making that voice go away entirely, but deciding when I'm going to pay attention to it. And this book and the time that I got to spend in my own story, finding some forgiveness and understanding for myself, the time that I got to spend immersed in the work of other queer writers helped me feel that that I was okay, and that I may never feel as much. I may never feel a part of any particular queer community, but I feel at home in my family and people I've surrounded myself with, and it's getting easier over time to stop expecting that I'll ever stop doubting from time to time.
In somewhat of a similar vein, you talk in the book about how you sat in bed one night and made a list of everybody who had been kind to you over the course of the year that you were in, to continue with our airplane metaphor, some turbulence, you might say. and you wondered why they had been kind to you and if you deserved it. And this broke my heart because for a million reasons. And obviously I've also wondered the same thing in my own turbulence. And, you know, my first question that emerges is, what do you think kindness looks like when in moments like this for people? That could be for yourself, but it could also be for other folks that you show up for. I'm curious to know what kindness looks like.
My God, these questions, you're amazing.
Thanks.
Gosh, that is such an amazing question. After I answer it, will you answer it? Because I'm really curious about what it looks like for you. I think for me, well, I remember thinking, so my father died when I was 24. And I remember coming back I had been in Oklahoma where I grew up, and where he passed away. And I remember coming back and feeling that I was a different person having lived through that experience. And I also felt this what I think was a very natural desire to talk about it, even the parts of it that were really painful or that are not things we usually talk about, like what it was like to actually be with someone who was dying. And I remember so clearly what it felt like to talk with people about this and to either be received openly and with kindness and an effort to hear me, even if they didn't understand me. And then what it felt like, on the other hand, to have people be so consumed with not knowing what to say that I think they couldn't hear me anymore. And I think that experience, I experienced moments of that in coming out and in explaining this huge shift in my family structure to people. There were so many people who received me with great kindness, and what that looked like was the ability to listen and to stay present with me, and to not rush to say anything or to ask me to explain myself further. I'm so grateful for the people who just listened, and it's so much simpler than we think to make someone feel heard and cared for. Like, it doesn't, if anything, I think sometimes it just takes being willing to be silent with someone. And that, for instance, feels so different than having someone in their own panic spray me with questions. And so I'm really grateful to the friends who just maybe if they were flinching on the inside, I couldn't tell, but who really stayed there with me and stayed with my experience and didn't try to talk me out of it, or sometimes didn't try to make me talk at all. Yeah. What about you?
There's something coming up for me about honesty too, like especially with old friends, like people that have known me for a really long time, who are just willing to say something that might be really hard to hear, and that I'm sure was hard for them to say, but were willing to give me a piece of truth that felt like a lifeline in that moment. Or definitely just people who were willing to bear witness to my upheaval and my pain and my sadness, and people who are also it was a great act of kindness for some folks just to name what I was feeling as grief. I think that I have another question for you about grief, but this idea that you talk about, are you allowed to grieve if you've caused the death? Like this idea that living grief, like the loss of a relationship and of a marriage, and it means a lot to a lot of different people that you don't even realize. You think that it's about just you and this other person, and then it's about so much more than that, and it's about so many more people. And I think the greatest act of kindness, some of the greatest acts of kindness that I received, were people that were willing to understand that was a grief that I was feeling, even though I was the cause of it, and to be tender towards that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're also not willing to let me off the hook and, brush it under the carpet, but also just really be honest with me, but also name what I was feeling. Sometimes I couldn't name it myself, so I needed others to hold up the mirror. Yeah. Yeah, so I am wondering about grief. I think that there's a lot of grief and joy in this book. I think that that's what's, I've been thinking a lot about how grief is kind of a queer emotion, in the sense that it just has no boundaries, and it shows up at these times that yeah, it really just is a very profound and important teacher. And I'm wondering because you do write so beautifully about the loss of your father, and I know that, and of important aunts and uncles in your life. And I know that grief has been no stranger in your life, but what did this chapter of your life, this particular kind of upheaval, teach you about grief, and maybe even how to show up differently for others who might not be experiencing grief in the traditional sense, but in these untraditional ways?
Mm-hmm. I love that idea of grief as a queer emotion. And I think it's really, I love that in so many ways, because I think that, I think this is shifting, especially in light of this year and the huge instability of it, and all the grief that we're all feeling at the ways that our lives have changed. But I think that for most of us, I think that grief is something that we desperately avoid, or that seems like it should be limited naturally just to the loss of a loved one, for instance. Mm-hmm. But for me, I think because I grew up in this family where there was a lot of loss in my family growing up. I wouldn't say that I got comfortable with grief in any way. Mm-hmm. As a child, I think I was very unnerved by watching my mother grieve, in particular. But I remember thinking, when I became a mother myself, and I felt, I went through what was actual clinical depression, but I can, both at that time and now, really clearly separate that from what I think is non-pathological grief. And I think that, I felt a huge amount of grief at losing my life as I knew it before becoming a mother, losing that identity, losing that time, the loss of knowing that my daughter would never meet all of these people in our family who passed away before she was born. And that to me felt like, oh, this is me. Like there's nothing wrong with my feeling this way. This is me, like living as a whole person. And that was very separate from the experience of depression. And I would say the same thing in a certain sense about the grief, for instance, like through this pandemic. I think that for me, it comes and goes in waves, and some weeks really just sort of sweep me up, and I feel, so much grief. But I think that because so many of us are starting to acknowledge that grief and put a name to it, I feel like it's also hugely freeing, in that we are getting to maybe for the first time acknowledge all kinds of losses that I think we usually just connect to death. And I think that for me, acknowledging these losses and properly grieving them, like acknowledging the loss of the life that I thought I was going to have in my marriage, the loss of the hope that Brandon and I had when we got married. Like, that didn't just like curdle and die. Like, it was very sad to see that hope was never going to go anywhere. And it feels really good to see us as a culture start to acknowledge the presence of grief in all sorts of little ways, that aren't just connected to death. And I think it makes us more human. And there's so much freedom in that. not pretending that, we aren't experiencing little losses and shifts all the time.
Yeah. There's a scene with June in the book where it's the pink fish, it's the pink purple fish conversation. And your response to this beautiful moment where she's kind of grappling with a newly formed family and or the fact that y'all's family is changing. And you say, I'm not sure if I was happy or sad or some third thing. And I'm wondering, in light of this conversation that we're having about grief, like, what is the third thing? Is this it? Like this, what is the third thing?
I don't think I have a name for it, or a solid answer for that. But I think that some of the moments in life when I have felt the most, this sounds cheesy, but when I felt like the most alive, and this happens a lot, this happens when I'm really deep in writing, is when I'm feeling that like third thing, like not necessarily happy, not necessarily sad, but just like this nameless feeling that is all of those things mixed together, and that is like the feeling of being like a sentient human.
Being alive, being fully alive.
Something like that.
That's awesome. I'm curious about family at this moment. And obviously a big theme of this book is how your understanding of family expanded. And I'm curious to know what you identify, and maybe even if you don't mind sharing what June identifies as expansion in family life now that she has, I think you've said this, a mama, a papa, and an Ash. How has her life been expanded through this journey that you've been on?
It's tricky, and I don't want to answer for her, because I think that is still very much evolving, and I think that my own wishes for how she will see her family are very much tangled up in my understanding of how she sees us. But I just feel so, I think I'm a way better parent to her now than I was, in so many respects. And I think that I can't even imagine. I have all these moments. So, I grew up in Oklahoma. I now live in Seattle. I have all of these moments in looking at her thinking, oh my God, my child is going to know X as normal. Like my child is going to know like growing up near the ocean as normal. My child is going to know like it's staying light outside until 10 p.m. in the summertime as normal. These things that stand out to me in huge relief because this was not part of my childhood. And I just feel such huge gratitude and also real interest in what, in how her understanding of family will be different from what mine was growing up. And, certainly I hope that it's much more expansive than mine was growing up. And I just sort of don't know how it couldn't be. I think that, what they say about kids being way more flexible and quicker to learn these things than we adults are is so true. I don't think she has ever thought for a second that there was anything not like anything atypical about me as her mother being married to a man and now being married to a non-binary spouse. I just don't think she doesn't know yet that is not normal. She has now, I remember I used to sort of console myself early in our separation and divorce with the thought that she didn't really know that not all families do this. And now she does. And I can see that she is still digesting that and will be for a long time. But I am so grateful that she is getting to have a baseline understanding of family that is so much broader than I could have imagined as a child.
Yeah, there's something coming up for me around motherhood, and this is also related to a question from an audience member. So I'm going to try to weave these two together. So I'm a person who has struggled a great deal with the question of if I want to become a mother in the traditional sense. So far, I've obviously decided not to. And a lot of people in my own life and in my own journey have said things to me like, well, it's a good thing that you don't have children, because that would make this so much more difficult, which is on both sides of things a very painful thing to hear. In the list of comments that aren't helpful, that would go in that column, not in the acts of kindness. And the question that I have is, I think it's just really hard to extricate. I'll get to the question after I say this last thing. It's hard to extricate identities when you're moving through. And you write a lot about, I don't know if I ever could have done this differently, but I am wondering what you would want to say tonight on this particular, in this particular conversation around how being a mother motivated you to choose yourself. Like, I think that that's a really important thing that emerges in the book, is that it's staying in a relationship that doesn't serve you is sometimes, is not the option. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I felt really clearly, even in all of my moments of beating myself up for what at times I felt like was, doing this to my family. Like, I did this to my family. Still, through all that, I remember thinking to myself that I want to live in such a way and make choices in such a way that maybe someday, like, I want to be someone who she can be proud of. I want to be the person who I would want to raise her. Does that make any sense? And the person who I want to raise her is not someone who is wholly selfless, or, I'm a real people pleaser, massive perfectionist, etc. Still grapple with this all the time, but in my right mind, I don't want her to be raised by someone who is perfect, someone who is selfless, someone who is a quote unquote good woman by the standards of the 1950s. I want her to be raised by someone who is committed to growing and asking hard questions and making hard choices and doing the best she can. And that really helped steer my course.
Did that commitment also have anything to do with helping you secure? We wrote a little bit in our email exchange about this idea of empathy for self. And I'm wondering if the role that June plays in your life helped you cultivate some empathy for yourself, if those things are related at all. Or I'll just leave it at that.
I have to say that this is where therapy really helps.
I was going to ask about that too.
My therapist at a certain point said something that is so simple and that I've thought about many times, which is like, if June messed up, or if June did something, if she made a mistake, if she did something bad, would I, would I be able to, forgive her? Like, how would I respond to it? How would I talk with her about it? And then helpfully reminded me that this is how I should talk to myself as well. Because of course I'm going to forgive her. Of course I know that she is inherently good. And that the fact of her making mistakes or making bad choices, that it doesn't change her inherent worth or goodness or intention. And it's so simple, and yet it remains so powerful for me.
Yeah, I wanted to give a shout out to your therapist who gives some great advice throughout the book. And also just wanted to know, what role therapy played for you specifically in this moment, which I would also say in my own experience is a very tender time, and where therapy has been a real lifeline, but also the role that perhaps now understanding that Ash is a therapist, just like what does mental health self-care look like for you, and over time, how has it supported you individually, but also maybe even as a writer?
I think that something that draws Ash and I together is that we are both sort of doggedly committed to trying to understand ourselves. And that takes many different forms. And sometimes we're making progress with it, and sometimes we're not. But I think each major writing project that I've done, each book was really an attempt. Well, as I was saying earlier, that writing for me is an attempt to understand and to think, to form a record of thought. And I think that that what has drawn Ash to, and I can't speak for them, but I think part of what has drawn them to wanting to be a mental health therapist is a desire to understand themselves. At least that's how I experience it. And so we are, even though that looks really different for each of us, and we're very different people, and even when it's really challenging, because we have very different things that we're grappling with, I think that we are always trying to learn how to show up for each other and how to support each other in our own efforts to care for ourselves, even when it inconveniences the other. And that's a really incredible way of being in partnership that I had never experienced before. It's hard. Ash seems to be very natural at allowing themselves to not be. Yeah, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but yeah, it just feels really good to be in relationship with someone who is as committed to asking the questions and not being set on one single answer as I aspire to be.
That gives me, I'm gonna have to think about my own attachment to the answers. That's a great way to put it. I was thinking maybe we could pivot to some questions from the audience.
Sure.
I appreciate you going on this meandering journey with my questions. This is about writing. The question is, you write so beautifully about those that are close to you. what was it like to write so intimately about Nora, who's not a part of your family, and advice for how to approach consent to write from those who you aren't close to anymore?
This is something I think about a lot, and I don't think that there is one specific easy answer. I think that, okay, I'm gonna sort of like feel this out from, I tend to, Ash was saying to me last night, I tend to speak in like reverse paragraphs. Like I'll start to explain something and then I'll be like, well, let's back up and I'm gonna start, no, actually I'm gonna start from here. So I'm about to do that to you. I'm very sorry. So I think that in general, it is a very tricky thing to write about one's own life because your life always intersects with other people's lives. And I think that it is important when we are writing about our lives where they intersect with other people's lives to try never to put words in another person's mouth, to try never to assume what another person is thinking, to try to always stay within my own perspective, and to really acknowledge when I am making interpretations or when I am reading into something. I think if anything, that is a really interesting aspect of attempting to write personal narrative or memoir, is getting really curious about what's going on in your head, your own head, not someone else's head, but when you are in relationship with another person. And how do you capture that on the page without making assumptions about them and without telling a story that is not yours to tell? Because the only part of this story that I could really tell was the part where I was actually there, right? So there are a number of characters, and I say characters because there are a number of characters in this book, and I say characters because they are people I made anonymous to the best of my ability, or composites. And I did that because I could not get their consent without compromising my ability to tell my truth and my story. And so the way that I could protect them was by making them anonymous, trying the best I could to conceal their identity, and also trying my damnedest to never make assumptions about what was going on in their heads, and to also not interpret their actions in a way that I couldn't confirm. So I think that writing about someone whose consent you can't ask is always a really tricky thing, and I certainly do not do it perfectly. I feel like I'm learning all the time. But I think that as writers, we have to protect our space to write the story that is our story. And then we, before we share it with the world, we need to make sure that we're doing no harm by doing everything we can to protect the people who appear in our stories, and also by gathering around ourselves as writers a bunch of people who can read our work and tell us when we are venturing into dangerous or harmful territory. So I really relied a lot upon not just my editor, but also other readers in my community who I felt like could help me make sure that I was being fair to the best of my ability, and that I was telling my story and not anyone else's.
So this is continuing a little bit about Nora, even though it's taking a different path. What was it like when you discovered the reality of Nora did not match the fantasy you had? And what would you say to Nora now, if there's anything that needs to be said?
I think it's really what what I wound up saying in the book, which is that I think we both made each other, and again, I can only give my interpretation of it, but I know that I felt unstable. Felt like I was on unstable ground in our relationship, and maybe she felt the same way. I know that I didn't feel safe with her in the sense of I felt like I couldn't be who I was becoming. And I know that that often if I'm feeling that way, then the person I'm in relationship with isn't in a great spot either. So I know it was a hard time for both of us. And yeah, I think that the upshot of it for me was that that I can trust myself, that I know who I am, and I know what I need and want, and I can't allow someone else to talk me out of it or tell me that that I don't need what I need. And that's a signal that I have to move on. And I remember feeling very, very pissed at myself at the time, like that I spent all of those months and all of that energy trying to make something work when I was sort of in the process kind of throwing myself and what I truly needed out the window. But in retrospect, it wasn't that long, and I feel like I feel grateful that that I got to learn that as quickly as I did, and that that she showed me the care that she did, even though she couldn't meet me where I was, and I also couldn't meet her where she was. I don't know. I feel like I get very rambly in thinking about that, because it is hard to talk about that relationship without and say any more than I did in the book, because I don't want to speak for her.
Right. It just seems like an incredibly clarifying exercise. You learned some very important things in that relationship. That was my reflection on that relationship, is that it taught you some very important things to take into your current life. So,
well, in the same way that, I think we have all been learning, like through all of these protests around police brutality and all of these things this year, we've all been learning that like no single group of people is a monolith, right? I think that I was so desperate to have someone accept me in this new version of myself as a queer woman, that I believed her for a while when she told me that I wasn't the right kind of queer person, that I was doing queer wrong. And I just hope that I think this happens to people in all kinds of places, being told that they're not being themselves correctly. And I feel really grateful that that we got free of each other before we contorted ourselves any further to try to make it work.
Yeah. This is the last question, and it relates a little bit to what we were talking about with motherhood and maybe even timing. If you had been married to Brandon, but childless when you had the experience that took place during jury duty, do you think you would have responded or reacted to your attraction differently? And if so, how or why?
God, that's so interesting. I haven't thought about that. There's a part of me, I can't imagine what that would have been like. I can't unsee it the way that it happened. But I do think that for me, like the physical transformation, the physical and like emotional transformation of becoming a parent, becoming responsible for someone else in that very physical way. I think that not only does it make a person vulnerable in that you feel things and you are exposed to things, feelings and hardships and joys like you didn't have before. But I think that also it truly made me, I mean, it sounds so simplistic, but it made me more brave. I think that I might not have, I think that I think I would have let myself live a lot longer in the shame of this crush that I had, and in the shame of what it might do to my marriage, what people would think of it. All those questions that plagued me anyway, but I think I would have lived in them a lot longer if I hadn't had somebody else so inextricably connected to me, like to pull me out and force me to do something. I feel truly that both the physical experience of giving birth to another human being and the experience of parenting her made me a bigger person. And it sounds so like cliched. But yeah, I don't know if I would still be married to Brandon if all this had happened and we didn't have a child, but it certainly, I think I would have, I don't think I would have been able to forgive myself the same way that that my relationship with June inspires me to forgiveness. Yeah.
That gives me some more things to think about in terms of motherhood. I appreciate that. I'm wondering if there's anything, well, this last question is great, and then I'll close. But okay. I'm wondering if you can talk about your writing influences and who are your contemporary writing heroes.
Oh, I love this. So all of my like quote unquote training in writing is in poetry. So my earliest writing influences as like a teenager and a young adult were all poets. And I feel like they sort of tuned up my ear at a young age in ways that I still feel hugely influenced by. So Frank O'Hara, I loved Frank O'Hara as a teenager. Robert Hass, particularly one of his early books called Field Guide. I feel like I've learned a lot about love and old love, or like love over a lifetime, from his poetry. But I actually don't read that much poetry these days. I read it occasionally, but not the way that I used to. I think that, let's see, my gosh, I feel like Maggie Nelson helped me really, I don't know Maggie Nelson, but through her writing helped me learn how to think differently about queerness and identity and about gender. Let's see, who else? Oh my God. I thought to myself earlier today, I'm going to get a stack of books off the bookshelf and like put them by my desk in case someone asks about what I've been reading or what influences me. And I didn't do it. Now here we are with me grappling. There are so many books and none of them are coming to mind. But I will say that I just recently started using bookshop.org as a way of sort of organizing books that I want to read, or being able to easily recommend books without using the big giant store that exists on the internet. And so I've collected, if you go to my link tree, which is linked from my Instagram page, you can find a link to my page on bookshop.org, where I have grouped a whole bunch of books that I love and a whole bunch of books that I want to read. So anyway, yeah, so there's that.
Well, Maggie Nelson, that's just mic drop right there.
Yeah, I feel like that's all you need to know, really. But no, there's so many people who not necessarily through their books, but just through things they've written out in the world. Hilton Alls, who is the theater writer for The New Yorker, the theater critic, he's written some incredible things about queerness and gender. He's an amazing writer, both of essays and book length work. I could go on and on, but I'm going to stop myself.
Well, the thing that I'm wondering is just, is there anything that didn't get asked that you wish had?
I don't think so. My gosh, we covered territory I would have never imagined. Thank you so much for the introspection you brought to this endeavor. My God, I feel so grateful to have gotten to think through these things with you. So thank you.
Well, again, I just am really grateful that this book is in the world. So thank you for creating it and jumping off the side of the pool into different water, because it's just a really important book. So I'm very grateful, and I hope that everybody who hasn't read it yet will, and of course buys their copy at Charis. And just absolutely thrilled to get to meet you too. So thank you, Molly.
Well, and I wanted to say, I know I said this to ER and to you, Susan, in the virtual green room before the event started, but I would not have gotten to do this event at Charis if it were not for this horrible pandemic. So anyway, I'm just so grateful to you guys at Charis for this incredible lineup of virtual events you've been doing, and for being a force in the world of progressive literature and thought. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. This was really wonderful. Susan, as always, your questions were beautiful. If folks don't have the fixed stars yet, you can just click that teal button at the bottom. We would love for you to buy it directly from Charis. We will ship it right out to you. It's ready to go. It is also my honor and my job to encourage you to support the work of Charis. We are primarily individually donor sponsored, so that means that's how we are running the show during this pandemic. So in any little bit that you have really helps us continue to do this work. We know folks are in all different kinds of economic situations right now, so we're really glad you're here. And all of our events are absolutely free, but if you are able to donate, it really helps us continue to use platforms like this and to connect with other folks. So until next time, we are really glad that you are all here tonight. Thank you so much, Molly. This was really great. Thank you, Susan. And the last thing I'll say is we will be adding captions to this and reposting it on YouTube soon. So please let folks know about that as well. So until next time, yes, please stay safe and get the fixed stars and read. Give it to friends. It's a necessary book.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.